All right, everyone. It is great to get to be here with you today, having this webinar talking about rare disease and patient recruitment in clinical trials. Um, Obviously, we've got some great guests here today. Let's go ahead and do some quick, maybe 30-second introductions. I'm Leanne Wilkie. I am a director of life sciences at TransPerfect, and I oversee our patient solutions. Kate?
Yeah, hi, Leanne. Hi, everybody. I'm Kate, based out of the UK, founder and CEO of Innovative Trials. We're a specialist patient recruitment company, and so glad to be here. So thanks, Leanne.
And Will.
Hey, Kate. Hey, Leanne. And hey, Frank, if you can hear me. My name is Will Krugman. I'm the Director of Marketing, Communications, and Patient Engagement at Clinical Research Associates. We are a trial site in Nashville, Tennessee. And I bring a career of corporate and marketing communications and PR to clinical trials, and hope to talk about some of the strategies that major companies would use in branding and marketing and communications to apply that to patient recruitment for rare disease.
Perfect. And Frank Rivera, we have you. So if you can hear us, go ahead and introduce yourself.
My name is Frank Rivera. I'm from Long Island, New York. I represent Stronger Than Sarcoidosis. And
I can't hear him. I'm sorry.
Happy to be here. Can you hear me?
A little bit. So we've had some technical challenges today, as always. Anytime we try to do a webinar, it seems like there's always something exciting. We've got Frank Rivera, who is the founder of Stronger Than Sarcoidosis. Frank is also a rare disease patient and has a phenomenal story. So we're super excited to have Frank here. And we believe his story is important enough that we're going to do some technology gymnastics to make sure that you get to hear a bit from Frank. I've got him here on the speakerphone, and he's also navigating some of the tech. So bear with us, but you're going to want to hear his story. Okay, so let's start off with a poll. I think is a great idea. If we can pull the poll up about recruitment. And, you know, this is kind of one of the things that, do you struggle with recruitment goals? And so if we can get that poll up, if not, if you can put it in the chat, we'd love to hear, what are your biggest struggles with recruitment in clinical trials? Mm-hmm. Do you struggle?
Yeah, and with rare disease, I'd really like to know where the pain point is. Is it raising awareness about the condition and the medicine that you're studying? Or is it about, you know, we found a large group of people or a few people that have this condition that might be good candidates, but we're having trouble converting them from people that are interested in the study to actually being in. So I'd like to know what is more difficult for you?
Absolutely.
And so while we see if we can get that poll up and get some answers to that, let's kick things off with, you know, how is rare disease patient recruitment different than any other trial? Or is it?
I'm happy to handle that. And Kate, is that okay with you?
Absolutely. Go ahead.
Okay, great. So obviously with more common diseases, that's what I normally work on, things like vaccines or diabetes or you know, a lot of the weight loss medicines that you've been hearing of. That's what I've been focusing on a lot lately. And obviously there are just a lot more people that are interested in those sorts of clinical studies. And so things like digital marketing work really well for that. And things like building an email list and raising awareness about it are really good steps to take. But the way I've been thinking about rare disease is that it's a lot more like when you're marketing a luxury good or a very niche product to somebody. There might be very few people in the world who are interested in what you have to offer. But those people are very interested in what you have to offer. I was speaking with a colleague from business school the other day about his work with Gibson guitars, for example. And there are, you know, a lot of really high-end guitars you can buy on Gibson, from Gibson. And similarly, there might be, you know, only a couple of clinical studies that fit for a particular condition. And so somebody that's in the market for a very nice guitar, you know, that's a high stakes decision for them. They're going to probably just buy one or two of these in their entire life, much like how a patient in a rare disease study hopefully is only in one or two their entire life. you're going to want to know as much as you can about the product that you're buying or the study that you're going into. So there's, a huge intensive period of gathering information for that. And it's probably going to take a lot longer for you to make a decision to enroll in a rare disease clinical trial than it would for, your run-of-the-mill vaccine study. Not that any study is truly run-of-the-mill, but in comparison. And obviously there's a big difference in trust and relationship building with patients in this category. Of course, trust and relationship building are important in all aspects of clinical trials, but I think here you really need to know what your patients value. So think about what's really important to them. In the Gibson example, my friend had a hard time when they would focus on sort of the metals and alloys that were going into the guitar, what was really not important to their high-end customers who might not have been extremely engineering savvy. What they really wanted to know was how easy is it to play, how cool does it look, and that sort of thing. And so your patients might value things that you don't anticipate, and you might want to focus more on what they care about, like their quality of life, their time with family, their dignity, than something very scientific and heavy into the chemical compounds or the specifics of what they're taking. Of course, that's important, and it's very it's critical that you can explain these things in detail when they ask. But I think right off the bat, what's more important is to kind of start developing that relationship of personal preference and familiarity. So it's a long-winded answer, I guess, but hopefully there's stuff we can go off of there.
I love that you're pulling in traditional marketing and looking at how do we really get to understand in marketing the consumer, but in patients' solutions, it's the
of course, it's not a one-to-one comparison because healthcare is so different than consumer goods, but I think there are lessons that we can take.
Sure. So it's understanding who is that patient. And, we've got some data showing that if you involve patients early in the process and you get to understand what are their preferences, what's really important to them, we end up with more meaningful endpoints. And as you go through the approval process, taking that information to the FDA and letting them know these are the endpoints that really matter to patients. And you're also able often to reduce the number of data points that need to be collected. Sometimes estimates are up to 50% fewer data points. And as you're asking sites to collect 50% fewer data points, it's also going to affect study budgets. So we've seen reduced study budgets. We've seen less data collected, more meaningful data by getting patients involved early and, understanding what is important. Just as you would never sell a guitar to a guitar player in a band based on alloys and chemicals, they want to know how it sounds. They want to know how it feels. They want to know how it plays. And a patient similarly wants to know what's important to them. Kate?
Yeah,
Absolutely.
I agree with what Will's saying and kind of what you're saying. I think it's when you think about rare disease trial, it tends to be like a wider family decision as to whether the participant or the patient goes in the trial. So we've actually got a kickoff meeting ongoing at the office at the moment for a rare disease trial, pediatric rare disease trial, and kind of having conversations about really thinking like broad and wide about the participant, their family, how will they get to the center? So really kind of walking in their shoes and really understanding the challenges that they might have to get to the site. Thinking as well about the wider family, so potentially siblings, how do we involve siblings, and who's going to help make the decision to be part of the trial. So the whole conversation was around education and really making sure that the participant and their families have all the information they need to make that decision. And the decision, yes or no, to go in the trial, absolutely, that's their decision to do that. But really ensuring that the sites and the participant has got lots of time to make that decision. And actually there's multiple chances for them to ask their questions. Obviously in rare disease, there's not as many competing trials. And so making the decision to go into this trial, it might be the only trial, is hugely important. There might not be any other option. So making sure that they have all that information available in whatever form they need to kind of decide whether the trial is right for them or not.
It's a great point, really, is that it is that broader decision involved. I see Frank,
Yeah.
you are there. If you can hear us, or maybe if you can't. So you can hear us. Can you go ahead and speak in the mic and see?
Can you hear me now?
We can.
Hey, there we go. Sorry about that.
That's okay. We're happy to have you, Frank.
Can you still hear me?
Yes.
I'm
Because
fine.
I can't hear you guys.
Okay.
I need to hear you through the phone.
So if you can hold the phone, further away from your mic, then we won't get the reverb back.
How's that better?
Perfect.
Okay.
So Frank,
I'm
we'd love to
sorry.
have you. Can you introduce yourself? Tell us a little bit about your story, because you've got a phenomenal story, and I think it's important for people to hear.
Okay. My name is Frank Rivera. I am the president of Stronger Than Sarcoidosis. I have been diagnosed with sarcoidosis since 2011, but I was misdiagnosed in 2004. I was living in Florida. I had trouble. I went out for a run because I used to run a lot. I actually broke 4 minutes in the mile and ran a marathon, the whole deal. And I used to run like 5 to 10 miles a day. Went out one day and didn't get a quarter of a mile. I went to the hospital and they just told me that I had masses in my lungs. So right away, I'm thinking I have cancer. They did a biopsy, and unfortunately, they misread the biopsy, and they did tell me I had lung cancer. And it went even a step further in the fact that I went through 4 years of chemo and radiation for something that I never had. Yeah, so that was a little tough at that point. I was down to 95 pounds. The chemo helped the masses not grow any larger, but the radiation killed my body. And really quickly, what happens with sarcoidosis is it's your white blood cells. They go to fight off something, but instead of fighting off, they clump up together and form masses or granulomas anywhere in the body. So when the radiation, was killing white blood cells, so my body got overactive and making more and more and more white blood cells. So fast forward to 2011, I had problems again. I moved back up to New York, and they were like, all right, you have masses again in your lungs. I thought I was in remission. So they did a biopsy, and they diagnosed me right with sarcoidosis. By that time, I already had it in 75% of my body.
Frank, can you talk a little bit about how you found out after you got your diagnosis? Where did you go to get information?
Well, I first tried online, like everybody else, become the online doctor, and I found a national organization for sarcoidosis, Foundation for Sarcoidosis Research, but at that time they only had 3 people working there, and unfortunately, not one of the 3 people had sarcoidosis. So it was really hard to get it. I mean, I got textbook information that I already had online. So it was kind of rough. I really couldn't get any, real time information, and I couldn't find other patients. So I started my own organization and reached out because I didn't want anybody to go through what I went through. And so my organization, I try to work with the Foundation for Sarcoidosis Research as a patient for patient. And so patients had somebody they can talk to. And that's how it originally started.
So what would have been most helpful at the time of your diagnosis? What were you really searching for?
I was searching for the right doctors. That was first and foremost. And then B was there is no cause for our disease, and there is no cure, of course. But I was trying to find anything that would help with my daily life, because it's a very painful disease, and like I said, it attacks any part of your body. I have it now in every major organ except for my kidneys, and it was really, really painful. I was just trying to figure out how I could live daily life.
And I know you and I, Frank, have talked several times in the past, and I've had the opportunity to get to meet you in person. And one of the things that, as I've told you, that really inspires me about you is your resiliency. And I think you alluded to the fact that you broke the 4-minute mile, and you were also an elite runner. What was it that really drove you through? Because a lot of what we hear about in some of these conditions, particularly I think in rare disease, is a sense of the mental side of what goes on in the disease process.
Yeah, I actually did attack it like as if I was a runner in the beginning, and I started to go like I was. One of the biggest things that I found out is that we weren't getting any money from the government. So that was my big push. First off, is to raise awareness, because I mean, we're on the high end of the rare disease community. We're right on that, really teetering on that 200,000. So that was one of the things that really, it drove me when I found out that we were getting no money. And I'm a very driven person. If I decide to do something, I am going to do it. And one of the things I always kid about is that I actually spent almost 2.5 weeks in DC, and I knocked on every senator's and every representative's door, and I didn't leave until I talked to somebody. So my Senator Schumer, actually, he was the last one I stopped at, because I knew I was getting support from him. And he's like, "Oh, I heard about you stopping at everybody's door. They all called me." He's like, "They call you the pain in the neck." I'm like, "Hey, at least they call me something." They all know my name. So yeah, so I was very driven. But then in 2015, I was told there was no medicines that were really there left to help me. A lot of the drugs that I was using was off-label drugs for like the arthritis. That was the biggest part. The arthritis for me was the main, really hurt me the most. And they were telling me there was really nothing else that they could do. I was in so much pain, I was laying in bed almost for weeks on end. I couldn't even get out of bed. And I'd say this out now to everybody, and Leanne knows that in 2015, I almost took my life. I had it all planned out, had everything set up, but I made one last call, and I called my counselor. I've had the same counselor since 2011. And I called her, and I told her what I was going to do. And she's like, "You don't want to do this." And I'm like, "Yeah, I do. I have it all planned out. I'm ready. I'm good to go." And she's like, "No, you called me. If you really wanted to do it, you wouldn't have called me." And that was a aha moment for me. And then fast forward, I found out in the 2 years from 2015 to 2017, 30 people that I knew for sarcoidosis passed away. And out of those 30 people, 18 committed suicide. And a lot of it had to do with the pain. And I was like, if I'm going through this, how many others in the rare disease community is going through it? Mm-hmm. So I started reaching out and doing mental health work. I actually just spoke at the World Orphan Drug Congress about mental health. I think mental health has to be part of total health. And it also has to be part of when it comes to clinical trials, when it comes to pharmaceutical companies, when they're dealing with patients, or biotech, same thing. I think that we all have to think about the mental aspect, because stress especially for our disease, stress literally kills you. And so, I mean, if we can reduce that stress on a patient and make it easier for them to, because a lot of patients want to do clinical trials, but it's the stress of getting there. It's the stress of taking off of their drugs that were working. I think that it's something that pharmaceuticals and biotech really have to understand and have to look into. How are we going to help these patients and make it easier for them?
Yeah.
Frank, I thank you for your vulnerability and you're willing to share your story. I think it's important for people to hear, because often we don't consider the mental health burden on patients, and we need to, obviously. So thank you for that. You probably just saved somebody's life, because somebody's now going to be more aware of it. You mentioned wanting to, that rare disease patients want to participate in clinical trials. They don't want to go through the washout period, that period where they have to go off of the drugs that are working for them. Somewhat working is better than not working at all, particularly when you're dealing with debilitating pain to the point where you're considering taking your life. So it's almost that sense of helplessness if there's nothing that can help and you're asked to stop. If you were to participate in a clinical trial, what would be the support that would be beneficial for patients? I know that Kate and Will both do some great things in that space, supporting patients, but what as a patient would you have liked to support you in that part of the journey?
Okay. Well, there's two things that I could really think of that would help with the support. There are many rare diseases that have multiple organs or involvement. And, like I said, the patients, they'll sign up for a clinical trial and they get denied. Mm-hmm. And we have to figure out a way, when you're dealing with multiple organ involvement, to be able to get these patients involved, because it's a very small pool. And you're grabbing from a small pool, but then when you're grabbing from an even smaller pool when you discard all the patients that have multiple involvement. So sure. How are you going to really get a right clinical trial? Mm. That's the first part of it. The second part is, I think you got to treat the patient and have the patient involved from the beginning to the end. That includes even after they're done with the involvement. Patients want to know what happened with that clinical trial. A lot of patients are smarter than people give them credit for. And they don't join a clinical trial if it's going to hurt them. They know that. A lot of patients know, there are some that are early in the thing and have to be helped. But there are organizations that want to help and be that middle person. I think you need to have those talks with the full community and really help the communities. Whether it be travel, whether it be expenses, just the stuff like that. That's the everyday involvement is what's really the stressor for the patient.
Yeah.
Yep. So, Kate, what were you going to say? I think you guys do some great things about supporting patients through that process. Talk some about that.
Yeah, I totally agree with what you're saying, Frank. And I think it's really understanding what the patient's going through and what will make their participation possible. So, I agree. Patient travel. We run a service called Navigator, where the navigators actually call the participants and kind of really, or call them to kind of see on how they are and what's going on, but also provide a kind of a help desk for the patients to call in, because I think however much we know clinical research and we've worked in clinical research for a long time, the patient is living it. The patient's in the trial. We're just working on the trial. And so the fact that they've got questions that we maybe never predicted, but given people the opportunity to ask all the questions they could want to ask in a safe environment without, worrying whether people are going to judge them, but really have that opportunity for someone to listen to them and also ask questions. And one thing, Frank, if I could ask you a little question, like if you were to consider going in a clinical trial, what information would you want and what questions would you ask?
I think one of the biggest worries, like I said, for me is if I get off certain drugs, how am I gonna make it day by day?
Yeah.
So we have to figure out how we make that change, because I think that's where we're losing a lot of patients. They, like for us, Remicade, it happens to be one of the drugs that works really well with us. And if you take them off of that, like for myself, I'll be in bed. Am I really going to be a great clinical trial if I'm stuck in bed? So I think that's one of the biggest things that and I know it's hard. I know the pharmaceutical end of it, and I know the biotech end of it. I deal with both. But I feel there's got to be a way. If you're talking to the patient, it doesn't have to be daily, but even once a week or something, and making sure that they're okay.
Yeah.
Both physically and mentally.
So that regular check-in's important.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And knowing that you've got that support and someone to reach out to, if you are going through that washout period and the symptoms become too much, knowing that you could reach out and talk to someone and say, hey, I can't do this. Maybe I need to discontinue the trial, or even maybe acknowledging that you can discontinue the trial. If you go through a washout period of getting off the drugs that you're currently on, that we are there to support you. You're not locked into a clinical trial once you agree to participate. And I think sometimes that's a fear that folks have, because they don't want to feel like they let down the sponsor or the site. But, we're here for your health and to make sure that it's optimized, and we hope to be a part of it. Will, do you have some thoughts on?
Yeah. First of all, Frank, thank you for sharing your experience with us. I'm very sorry about what happened to you, especially a couple of years ago. And I'm glad that you're here with us today. What really stuck out to me was when you're talking about the early part of your journey, and you mentioned that there was a foundation for your condition, but it was underfunded, it was understaffed, and it seems like it wasn't doing what it set out to do. And honestly, that breaks my heart. I think that there are probably a lot of conditions very similar to that throughout the world that have similar situations. So what I was thinking is, if you are a physician working on a medicine for this disease, or a researcher, or a sponsor company, or CRO, and you have the means to help out with this nonprofit aspect of it, I think that should kind of be table stakes for what you're doing to support the medicine. It should go without saying, to support the foundations that support the patients. I think that is just a really kind of easy step that people can take. Obviously, there's bureaucracies in big companies. It can be difficult to push those sorts of things through, but to hear Frank talk about how he essentially set up his own foundation, not essentially, he literally set up his own foundation and went and talked to every single senator while he was going through all of this pain. I think that it's not too much of an ask for others to step up, especially if you're passionate about finding cures and helping patients. And the other thing, sort of the last thing you mentioned, was about having that person to rely on, maybe that navigator, Kate, that you're speaking to, or somebody that's going to check up on you and making sure that you're really doing okay. You have all your questions answered and all of your needs met. I was thinking about that too, and I think that is a really good thing to have. But there's also something in the corner of my mind that stuck out recently. So if you'll bear with me for just a moment, hopefully this is a little bit more lighthearted. I'm in the market for a house, and it's my first house. So it's a high stakes decision for me. And I'm starting to take some tours of some properties, and kind of figuring out my price point and all of those things that matter to me. And I took my first tour last week, and the experience was great. I met the broker. She showed me around. I was like, okay, cool. This is awesome. I'm going to take my time to make some decisions here. And if you could send me some helpful information about, what are rental prices like in the area? What are the HOA rules? That would be great. So, I get home, or I drive home. By the time I've gotten home, she's already done all of that. However, and that was helpful. But what happened after that was she bombarded me with emails about other properties, about other information that was sort of very tangentially related, and kind of saying, hey, what do you think about the property? When are you thinking about being ready to make a decision? And I'm like, hold on, I told you in our meeting that I was going to take my time with this. And it really bothered me that she kept being so aggressive in the outreach. And I think that there can be maybe a correlation with how folks in clinical trials feel. This is a very personal decision. They're going to want to take their time with it, and talk with their family and their friends and other experts in the field. So yes, absolutely, be there for them with support and information and care when they need it. But you need to also find a balance of letting people have their space and time. So
Definitely. It's having that balance, and it's asking what are the preferences. You told her you want to go slow. So similarly is, if someone is curious about a clinical trial, are we asking them to sign a 40-page consent day one, or are we feeding them the information in a way that works for them? Are we calling them at work when they're trying to work in addition to dealing with a condition? Or are we sending it to them via email so they can peruse it at their own leisure at home with their family? Maybe there's another family member that needs to also be involved in that decision. And that's really where having those conversations with patients and finding out the preferences. What do you need? Instead of assuming we need. Now, Frank, I have a question for you. Have you ever had a pharmaceutical company or any biotech or anyone in the industry, so to speak, come to you and ask, as a patient, as a foundation, what do you need?
I would have to say it's getting better. In the beginning, I wouldn't even be contacted. And I'm like, I have a patient email list of well over 5,000 patients. Why wouldn't you contact me? I on my own would do webinars just to teach patients about clinical trials. Why wouldn't you want to have that middle person in there as an organization? Now, as a patient, like I said, it's hard because of, unfortunately, of the multiple organ involvement. As soon as they hear that, I'm kind of like been taboo, and I hate that involvement. But when I'm talking to other patients, they are starting to realize, like I always say, they're not a number, they're a patient. And that's something that pharmaceuticals are. I mean, I know they're under a time crunch. I know that, it's very hectic for a pharmaceutical or biotech as well. And it's very costly. And I understand that. But it is even more costly if you don't get enough patients to join in.
So, Frank, I think you're extremely understanding and kind in what you say there. What I would say is, you talk about patients not wanting to feel that they're a number. How can a company convey to patients that you matter, that we care, we're here to support? Is it that? So that's part one, and then I have a follow-up part to that too.
Okay, well, part one, is, like I said, is really contacting them, talking to them, if being available when the patient does have a question, because that 40-page clinical trial sign-on sheet, a lot of it is in jargon that they're not going to understand, patient. So make sure that it's understandable to the patient. Like I said earlier, patients want to be involved, but they don't want to feel inferior. So that's one of the biggest things.
Right. And that's such a good point. You know, we've got these mandates in the industry for plain language is what it's called. And the idea is that it's going to be more understandable. Yet even just a couple weeks ago, I got something in the mail that was a plain language summary. It said this across the top of it, which no one outside of the industry would understand even what that term means, which is kind of laughable. It was there. And it was not plain language. Like it was still had jargon in it. So I think you bring up a great point. People want to feel partners. They want to feel like they're respected and appreciated. As a patient, would you have felt more comfortable with like the sarcoidosis organization coming to you to talk about a trial or the pharmaceutical company directly? Which do you think would be more palatable?
I think they want to hear from both, but I think in the first round they want to feel comfortable, and like that's what a lot of patients call me about because I am a patient, and they know that I'm going to base it. Yeah, every patient in sarcoidosis, they call it the snowflake disease. Every snowflake's different, and so is every patient. But they know that I'll give them an honest answer. So if they feel comfortable with that organization, I think that organization would be the first one to contact them and say that. I also think that pharmaceuticals need to contact doctors and get their doc, because most patients, if they have a doctor that is just a sarcoidosis doctor or just any rare disease doctor, they feel comfortable. So trying to get them involved in it, I know they have a lot of patients and stuff, but I think it's something that that's a barrier that needs to be broken. So if the doctor comes up to them and says, "Hey, I saw this clinical trial. I think you might be good for it," they'd be like, "Oh, okay." And then they have a better relationship a lot of times with their doctor because that's the one they see the most.
So it's whoever you've got that rapport with.
Yes.
So, Will and Kate, if you were to try to find patients for a rare disease trial, what would be the first steps you would take to try to identify those patients, connect with them, and ultimately offer them participation in a trial?
Well, I think Frank had two good points there about the foundations and the physicians having different roles and responsibilities. I don't know if a foundation has the capability of speaking directly to a patient that they, have never met before. So I think it's on the physicians to recognize the conditions going on with their patients, and I know physicians are busy and might have lots of conflicting things pulling them in different directions. So sort of starting with the physician of raising awareness about the condition. Maybe there are sarcoidosis experts in in Frank's area or around the country that need to. Well, what I would recommend is that they do the work to raise awareness about the condition with other physicians. I think that doctors listen to doctors a lot more than they would listen to somebody like me with a marketing degree. So that would be where I would start is raising awareness, kind of physician to physician, health system to health system about the condition and what to look out for so that they know when to recognize that. And I think the foundation has maybe a different role, or the sponsor company that's sponsoring the medicine that they're studying has a different role as well. And that's to raise awareness among sort of the general public. And that's where you would see things like, being on Good Morning America and talking about your condition, or having the 5K races to support sarcoidosis patients and those sorts of things. And, kind of bringing people in, giving that feeling of community and support throughout the patient world. That's where I would start. And there are lots of avenues to go down in both of those channels.
Yeah, good points, Will. If I could, I would take the question a little bit earlier. And so a bit like Frank was saying earlier, the more we can get patients involved in protocols and clinical trial development, the better.
Yeah.
I think Frank's
Of
comment.
course, yeah.
Yeah, that would be the ideal, so that we develop a trial that's inclusive and is able to recruit as many patients with this rare condition as possible. But I totally agree. I think patient groups are really important. They know the disease way better than we do, and so getting their involvement, also informing them about the trial. So if there's no patient involvement from the patient groups early on, at least notify the patient group the trial's happening. I think as an industry, that's a courtesy that we should do anyway. We're running a trial in their country with their condition, and so as a courtesy, we should definitely inform them about the trial and really take the time to ensure the patient understands, so the patient group understands. So if it's placebo controlled, to explain what that means, to really ensure that they, Frank and Frank's equivalents understand the trial and have the information they need in case somebody calls in and says, I've heard about this trial, what do you think? It's much better if we've taken the time to inform the patient group about the trial so that they have that information that they then need. So that's, I think, doctors, I agree. I think doctors are obviously massively important, and giving them the information as well, using lay language or even, language we all understand, so that the patient is then in the position to make an informed decision, which is obviously what we all want. So we just need to do more. We need to start earlier. We need to do more to make sure that everyone's informed and educated.
I think it's also using tools like, if we're trying to educate every single patient group about clinical trials or an upcoming trial, is using technology to support us. Can we create a video? And then if it's going to multiple different languages, can we do voiceovers or translate it so that that information can be available? We've got also the issue of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And how do you include diverse patients in an even harder to recruit indication? So making sure that we've got systems in place to educate the advocacy groups and support them. Because as Frank said, if we've got groups that are run by a couple of people, that's a lot of work. And
Right.
so they're trying to do their day-to-day. Imagine if someone came to any of us already busy and said, hey, we want you to do this other thing too. We'd be like, oh my gosh, that's a lot. So supporting how we can. What can we use in technology to be able to create informational videos that explain things simply? We know that even there's some standards about using pictures and figures and graphs, and we have knowledge about how to best create those things in a way that's understandable to people. People have the attention span of less than a goldfish, less than 8 seconds. So you can't give them a 20, 30, 40 page document and expect they're going to read it and retain the knowledge and be able to formulate questions. Like even if there's a section or a video about these are the most common questions that people have after reading that consent document we asked you to do, like things like that, that we can look at how can we help people understand. And Frank talked about patients don't want to feel inferior. They're smart people. Maybe not in drug development. We're going to have more information because that's what we do.
Right.
Like certainly as you wouldn't want me building your guitar or repairing your car or flying your airplane. You do want me helping to do some of the things that I do well. So I think it's allowing each piece of the equation to really excel at what they're good at. Listening to patients, listening to advocacy groups for those patient insights and being able to liaise with them. And then allowing sites like yours, Will, that has a 97% engagement rate, because you guys retention rate. You guys do a lot of great things to keep patients involved, to handle their well-being, to handle their commitments, and so they feel supported.
Absolutely, yeah. Here it's about community. We've been in Nashville for more than 30 years, and so we've seen a lot of patients over those years come back and do study after study after study, and it's because we have a dedicated effort of showing our appreciation and making them feel welcome here, even if we're just doing a vaccine study, which is way less intense than what Frank is going through. We still want to make sure they feel at home, that they feel welcome, that they want to come back because it's their health, first of all. And they have an option of dropping out really at any point. So giving them that really grade A premier concierge experience is important for, any study, but I think in the rare disease space, it even more so, 10 times as important to understand who all of your patients are, because you're going to have fewer patients in those studies. So you really have an opportunity to get to know somebody on a personal level. And I think that, a lot of people on this webinar probably do that already, but I just want to encourage you to keep on going.
So we have some questions. I want to,
Great.
in my juggling of technology, I didn't see the questions earlier. So I apologize for those of you that sent in questions. We will make sure that we address them. One that came in is, how can stakeholders ensure that clinical trial participation is inclusive and representative of the diversity of rare disease populations, including ethnic and racial diversity, age diversity, and geographic diversity? Great question.
Yeah.
I would say making sure that you're localizing information for the different populations that you are trying to reach. Input into the protocol to make sure that if you've got parameters about age, that those can be lifted if possible. Other thoughts?
Find allies. Find people that are passionate about research or the condition, that are part of the community that you're trying to reach out to, and have one-on-one meetings with them. Talk about what your shared values are, and hopefully it's community health, public health, the health of every patient, no matter where they come from or who they are, and connect with them on a personal and human level. And then they can be your advocate when you go to other communities, and they can introduce you to people or physicians that serve that community. So find allies.
Great suggestion.
Yeah, I agree. I think taking the trial outside of the site as much as possible, so like community leaders, patient groups, going where patients are and where patients feel comfortable to speak. It's a huge challenge, and it takes effort. And so really thinking about how, who has the condition and where are they and how can we talk to them, but it takes a lot of effort and it won't happen by chance. So really planning on ensuring that the patient population is as broad and diverse as it possibly can be.
So a couple other questions. What barriers exist to accessing investigational therapies and participating in trials for individuals with rare diseases, particularly in underserved communities or low resource settings? This is a great point. Often these trials are done in specific locations. And so you may have patients that need to endure great expenses for travel. We once had a rare disease patient who was traveling from Nashville to Texas every 6 weeks for a clinical trial. And they were doing that at all of their own expense. I think as an industry, that's something that we really need to look at. Here you had a mom who had to take time off work to travel with her young son to go. They had to stay in hotels, they had airfare, et cetera, et cetera. So how are we supporting patients, and how are we letting patients know, hey, we'll support you through this, and then making sure that they're not waiting weeks, months, however long to be reimbursed for those things that they need? Any other thoughts on that one?
I don't want to speculate. I'd really love to hear Frank's answer to this, if available.
Well, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. Well, one of the things that I really push, and I tell pharmaceuticals and biotechs, is get in touch with the community even before the clinical trial starts. That's where you're going to get a lot of your answers. Our community has the same problem that Leanne was talking about. Our community is 37% is African American women. Up until about 2 or 3 years ago, sarcoidosis clinical trials, 1% was African American.
Wow.
Now, if you would have talked to the community before you even started the clinical trial, you would really get that information and know that you need to be diverse and make sure that we are including everybody else as well. So that's one of the biggest things that I always tell pharmaceuticals or biotech is, and also it builds a bond with the patients. It's not like you're coming in and say, we want something from you.
Mm-hmm.
It's just, if you build that trust and you build that community involvement, even before the clinical trial comes around, it shows that, all right, hey, wait a minute, they care about us as a person.
Right.
Not,
1000%.
so they would want to be involved, and you will get more people to join in. We had of course, the problems of the past of what happened to African Americans. But one of the things I did is I called out pharmaceuticals to a webinar with me and with patients and with doctors. And what we did is we try, as I say, break that barrier. Making sure the patients know what happened in 1960 is not happening now. And so that was something that I felt that needed to be done, because when I was taking surveys from patients, that was one of the biggest things. I don't want to be a lab rat. That I built that trust up. The pharmaceutical company I called wasn't even working on a sarcoidosis thing yet. And but it opened up their eyes. So I think if it'll help anyway, and it helps every rare disease community, because we are a close knit community. We have to be. We the motto that we always say in the rare disease community is, alone we are rare, but together we are strong. Because there's 30 million Americans that have rare diseases. So that's a lot of people.
Yeah.
So that's one of the things that I really push for pharmaceutical biotech to get in before, build that bond.
That's one of my pet peeves of really any study, of any indication, is that sometimes we're expected to kind of parachute into a community or go somewhere that we're not really a part of and ask them to participate in a study. Oh, sorry. And there are, very fair questions. Who are you? Do you care about me, or do you care about meeting your numbers? And the way to overcome that is, well, one, actually, you should care about the communities that you're trying to help. And you can show that by being there, 24/7, 365 as a resource, even if you're not, recruiting for a clinical study at that moment. Maybe take kind of a protocol agnostic approach and say, we're a company that deals with a lot of medicine in this category, and we're not recruiting for something right now, but I want to come out to your health fair, to your breakfast, or your annual gala, and just be there and listen to you and build those bonds.
We keep hearing this theme of trust and relationships, communication, and partnering. And that's, I think, really, it's refreshing to see that's where the industry is going, even as Frank was talking about the rare disease communities partnering together to really advocating as a larger group and realizing like, hey, wait a minute, we can do this in different ways. And I just, Frank, I so honor what you're doing and the voice that you are for the rare disease community, not just for sarcoidosis, but for sharing your story, for vulnerably sharing about some of the mental health journey that you've had through your disease state, the grace in which you handled your first diagnosis. I know the last time we spoke, you said when you found out that you endured 4 years of chemo and radiation for a disease, you did not have the amount of grace in which you transitioned to, as you said, your doctors told you could fight the disease or you could fight the people that had wronged you, and you chose to fight the disease. And that resiliency not only, I think, contributes to your own health, but it inspires those in your community. It inspires me in the industry and as just another fellow human being. So I just wanted to say thank you for sharing.
Thank you.
Thank you, Frank.
And thank you, Kate, for being there for patients and for helping to be that bridge that acknowledges the journey and supports them and walks with them throughout it. And you, Will, for using your unique skills to be able to find patients and introduce them to the world of clinical trials and bring them into your site, which does so much more than just offers clinical trials. You do have a community, which is testament to the fact that you've got patients that that do additional trials within your community. So thank you for that contribution.
No, it's an honor to work in this industry, and I think that hearing Frank's story, it just makes you want to do more and do better. So yeah, thank you, Frank.
Thank you, Frank, Leanne, and Kate, and happy belated Clinical Trials Day to all.
Yes,
Industry Day was yesterday. And Frank, again, I really appreciate getting to know you. If you're in the Nashville area ever, I'd love to take you out for coffee or meet for lunch. Just let me know. We'd be happy to, and hope to see you all again soon.
Thanks so much. Thanks all for tuning in.
Thank
we hope
you.
found some insights that you'll be able to implement in the work you do. And maybe it's even just reaching out to someone who is a patient and walking with them through that journey.
Thanks so much, Leanne.
Thanks so much for joining. Bye for now.
Bye-bye.